What's up there, everybody? I guess I'm going to talk about something that I guess most of us ordinarily try to avoid. And I don't even know how I'm going to discuss it. I actually started this video and then I turned off the camera. It's like, I'm not going to bother. And I thought, no, I should make a video because it's on my mind and it's something that I want to share with people because it's something that I've found to be one of the most useful yet most difficult to cope with factors of living a good life. You know, you hear a lot of people who say, everyone's heard, you know, what is the purpose of life? Or what's the reason for life? But the question that I think should be asked rather is, what is the purpose of death? So we know that life is, you know, all around us. We see it, we experience it. Regardless of why life exists, I think the question we're really asking ourselves is, what should I be doing with my life to best be fulfilled in this life? This has so many angles. There are people who live for today and nothing else. There are others who spend their whole lives preparing for the afterlife. To each his own, and each person's experience is unique. But one thing that I think that we all share is this inability to talk about the reason for death with any real understanding. And it seems simple. Well, things are born, we live a life, and they serve their purpose, whatever that may be, or no purpose at all, depending on what you believe. And then they emerge back into the unknown. One of the easiest ways to cope with the fact that we all pass on is that, and I've heard this said by several different philosophers and speakers, do you remember what it was like before you were born? No, of course not. Well, it's going to be like that. It's nothing to fear. It's just the unknown. Whether it be darkness or eternal light remains to be seen, but it's irrelevant at this moment. The idea is to overcome the fear or worry about that. And so most people just close their ears when a conversation comes up about dying because nobody wants to hear it. Everybody has somebody in their family who they've lost, who's probably come close themselves, a lot of people. Once you've had an experience where you've had, you know, almost died or had an extreme moment in your life where you're incapacitated, you can see it gives people kind of a newfound like love for life. In other words, instead of people feeling, well, giving up after, you know, almost dying, they think, holy shit, I better make the most of this. So we live our lives as best we can, and in the process, kind of making fun and laughing in the face of our mortality I really think is an important key. If I were to refer people to any one person, one speaker or philosopher or teacher who covers this the best, I would have to say it's Alan Watts. Hands down. I mean, a lot of people find him to be too not serious enough, and that is exactly why I think he's one of the greatest teachers of all time. He understood things on a level that worked well. I've heard people say, well, he was an alcoholic. Well, yeah, so what? You know, because you're a thinker doesn't mean you're not going to, you know, be attached to substances and have our own attachments. It's acknowledging who we are, right? Acknowledging that we have shortcomings, but being able to understand things on a joking level is important. Shake hands with death kind of thing. I think that if I were to think of not another speaker, and this is what I wanted to mention because I grabbed this book off the shelf, this Manly P. Hall, I mean, I was into him years ago, and he was perhaps one of the greatest teachers of understanding about the unknown and the mysteries of anyone I've ever come across. And I spent 2 years basically immersed in Manly P. Hall, listening to all of his lectures. I have the entire collection. And this book he wrote, I believe it was back in the 40s or 30s, it was his first big book, but this 1928, and it's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's been a pretty popular book since then in certain circles, but there's a little chapter in here, a little part that I was going to read about how they dealt with death. So the temples of Egyptian mysticism, from which the tabernacle was copied, were, according to their own priests, miniature representations of the universe. The solar system was always regarded as a great temple of initiation, which candidates entered through the gates of birth. After threading through the tortuous pathways of earthly existence, they finally approached the veil of the great mystery, death, through whose gate they vanished back into the invisible world. Socrates subtly reminded his disciples that death was, in reality, the great initiation, for his last words were, "Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt?" As the rooster was sacred to the gods, and the sacrifice of this bird accompanied a candidate's introduction into the mysteries, Socrates implied that he was about to take his great initiation. Life is the great mystery, and only those who pass successfully through its tests and trials, interpreting them aright, and extracting the essence of experience therefrom, achieve true understanding. And the reason I left on that note is because that's one of the big questions that's wrestled around in my head for the past, decade or so, is what did these mystery schools of the past really know? And can that be applied directly to our current understanding of life and death? In other words, can we learn something from our ancestors who came up with their own conclusions? We live in a time right now where there's too much information from too many angles, and much of the information is skewed, biased, or misinterpreted. And so rather than have a few ideas to choose from, in other words, being born 1,000 years ago and saying, well, I can choose this religion or this religion, there are 1,000 different paths or ideas a person can take. So it becomes confusing, and many people romanticize beliefs of the past, and they also romanticize the mystery schools. People like, Socrates and the early philosophers. The idea was that much of the ideas that they shared were condensed, practiced upon, and alchemists, I guess, were the result of all of this. And I did several videos about alchemy in the past because it was such a fascinating subject to me. It's not about converting, metals into gold, but the largest thing you can benefit from in alchemy is transmutation of ideas and how you view the world and the way you look at the world. And so this is, I guess, how I'm going to conclude this video. It's kind of, covering a couple of different bases, but it's all about the same idea that we don't need to fear death, and we don't need to fear the unknown. We also don't need to fear life. It all comes down to what's in our heads. Perhaps even what delusions do we choose to adhere to. That's a very subjective thing. But I don't know any better than the next guy. My own ideas can only influence me and those around me, and I do the best I can to incorporate what I learn into living a happier life. Well, something I thought about yesterday that, it's just, somebody was telling me how whenever I can't remember it, it reminded me of when I was a roofer when I was younger, and every time I'd go driving around, I'd always look at the roofs of houses. Okay, when I was building decks or doing different siding or something on houses, I'd be looking at the siding. Just the simple way I interpret the houses and homes and buildings around me is based on what I'm experiencing in my own life. I think the example was if you get a new car, anytime you've ever got a new car, not a new car, but a car that's new to you, you'll notice there's a lot more of those than you realized. When I drove my Astro van, I saw Astro vans everywhere. When I drove a Ford Ranger, there were Ford Rangers everywhere. And of course, driving a school bus, you notice every single bus. This is an important key, I think, to use to our advantage, to embrace the potential for us to manifest the world to look the way we want it to look, instead of being afraid of what it's going to give to us or how things are going to come across. In other words, we don't have to view negativity as negativity. It's very, anyhow, I'm going to go now because I'm going to start rambling, and I probably won't get any further on this subject. I guess my only point here was to discuss the idea that fearing the unknown is more or less a useless practice, and it only causes us to kind of withdraw deeper into ourselves. You know, that the less we understand, the more we want to understand, it seems like, the harder it is to understand anything. It's like the more you learn, the less you realize you know. It's an ongoing battle. And in this short life we have, all we can do is find purpose for ourselves. And that can be a blessing or a curse, depending on whether you take initiative to find what works for you. And remember that one of the biggest fears we have about our mortality in lives is that we feel like we might be wasting time. And I can honestly say I've done my best to not waste time, but I feel like I should be doing more. Like when I have some spare time, should I be doing this? Should I be writing or working or cleaning or doing, you know, life brings us all types of obligations. We always want to stay busy, and we always want to feel productive. The question is why? You know, where do these feelings come from? I don't know. How much of it is genetic? How much of it is learned? And along the path, we're trying to understand why. By the time we finally figure things out, it's time to go. So, talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day. Peace.